Well, hello again. In this podcast, what I want to talk about is the benefits of doing a local project. And there are at least two main benefits of doing them. So with a lot of people, the camera will often stay in a cupboard or in a drawer or wherever it normally lives until it comes time to go on holiday or go on some big trip or some event happens. And in those cases, quite often I find that people are trying to remember how to do certain things. They're maybe losing shots because they can't quite remember how to do something very quickly and they just miss the opportunity. So doing projects or having a reason to use your camera regularly is a great way of just staying on top of it, because photography, like anything else, or like many other things, you improve your photography by doing it. So practice makes perfect, as they say. So that's one aspect of it. The second reason for thinking about a local project is that shooting something that you've got easy access to and thinking about how you're shooting it can help your creativity. So what I mean by that is that you might shoot something that you wouldn't normally photograph. And in doing that, maybe you have to think a little bit more about how you're shooting it, maybe how you're using depth of field, how you're using light, how you're using shadow, maybe even how you're using color and focus. I mean, there are very many aspects to photography that you can begin to vary once you start to think about it. And the reason that I'm keen to do that is that when you go back to your normal subject, so in my case it's wildlife, it can give me some different ideas because I'm shooting something else in a way that I wouldn't necessarily shoot wildlife. And because I'm thinking about how to approach that particular subject, it means I might consider options that I wouldn't normally consider with my primary type of subject. So obviously in my case, that would be wildlife photography. So this is another reason for taking on something like a project or a local range of subjects, because it can expand you in a couple of ways. It can certainly just keep you current, keep your skills there for when you want to use the camera. It can also help you to improve those skills because you're perhaps using the camera differently to the way you normally would, and it makes you consider other ways of treating the image. And here I'm talking about post-processing as well as what you're shooting on the camera. So other ways of treating the image that you wouldn't normally consider for your normal subjects. So having said all of that, what are the kind of things you can shoot? Well, obviously, I'm talking local because most of us spend most of our lives in one place, around our home, wherever that might be. And therefore, we have easy access to a range of different subjects. Now, what that range happens to be obviously depends upon where you live. So I'm just going to throw out some very brief ideas, but if you're interested in looking at this or pursuing it further, you can certainly Google the kind of projects that you can do, maybe even take a new look at where you live and the kind of photographic subjects that you have and think about those. So let's look at a couple of broad ones. So the one I'm going to start with is just architecture. Now, obviously, that's a very broad category, and architecture is there for all of us because presumably we live in a house or a building of some sort, and that is architecture. So how do you approach architecture? Well, there's various ways of shooting it. You can shoot the kind of macro, the overall building, maybe where it sits in its environment, maybe shoot it from different angles, look at converging lines, leading lines, repeating patterns, that kind of thing. Equally, you can go into the kind of micro view of it. So you can start looking at the details, maybe do really close-up work on bricks or on any details that might be on the buildings. So where I live, I have shutters, wooden shutters. I'm in France, and they have these little iron hinge things that just hold the shutter in place. So some of those, when you start looking around, when I've been to different buildings, some of them are quite ornate. So that can become a theme. So this is another way of developing the sort of broader theme. Let's say architecture, we could look at sub-themes within that. So one of them might be the detail view. It might be how different fittings on the building are handled. It could be inside, it could be radiators if you have a heating system, it could be door handles. There are many things. Once you begin to look, you'll find that there are many different subjects you can begin to consider. And this is why I was saying earlier, they may not be the kind of thing you would normally look at, but once you start to look at them, you can start to think about how you would treat them. How are you going to use the lighting? How are you going to use composition? What are you trying to say about that particular subject? How are you going to use color? Are you going to put them out of focus? Are you going to put movement in there? So there are many things you can do when you start to look at these kind of subjects. So architecture is one, and it's not only about the building, but if you live in an urban area, how about the block where you live? What's going on in that block? What's the story of those buildings and that community? And maybe even there's a transition going on. Maybe some parts of where you live are falling into disrepair a little bit. Maybe some areas are being redeveloped. We live in constant change. So again, part of photography is to document change. It's to record how things were and record how things change into a new expression, a new way of being. So that's just a brief touch on architecture, and hopefully just from that very brief discussion, you'll see that there are many things that you can do. Now, another subject alongside that could be nature. And okay, I live in the country, so I have animals around, but you might live in the middle of a town or a city. Well, there's still nature about. That could be trees, it could be plants, it could be birds. You might have animals that come in, maybe at night, maybe foxes or other animals like that. So how can you tell the story of the nature of the environment that you live in? What is the story there? What is the nature there? And particularly if you are in an urban environment, often people will overlook what little pieces of nature you have. And of course, there are also things like insects, which certain times of year can be quite annoying, but you might find there's a huge variety and a whole ecosystem of insects, so more on the micro level, as it were, that you have just walked past every day for years. So again, by stopping and taking a look around, you can begin to tell the story of the nature of the environment in which you live. And again, if you do this over a period of time, and I'll talk about this in a moment, you can begin to tell the story of how that ecosystem is evolving, whether it's becoming broader or whether species are starting to disappear. So again, that's just taking nature as a very broad subject and telling the story of the nature of your environment. So what's another one we can do? Well, we can look at maybe movement. So this is going perhaps a little bit more sort of esoteric, but what is the movement of where you live? What's going fast? What's going slow? So it might be cars. Have you played with light trails, for example, at night? Have you tried playing with blurred results when you're photographing cars, shooting cars at a slow shutter speed? And what difference does that make to the environment that they're in, whether you're in an urban environment or in the country? If you just sit a camera on a tripod or even handhold it, and shoot at 1/60th of a second while something moves through the frame, what sort of results does that give you? What can you do with it? What can you do with the colors? What can you do with the composition? What can you do with the tonality on it? So again, with every subject that you shoot, there are a lot of ways you can vary the result to give you a different look, a different feel to the photograph. And it might be something completely different to how you would normally shoot it. And of course, the beauty of doing this, it gives you space to play. And I think most creativity comes from play and experimentation. So if you give yourself permission to just play with a subject that you haven't shot before, and you perhaps wouldn't normally even shoot, from that you can explore all sorts of different creativity avenues that you perhaps hadn't previously considered. And here I'm also looking at the post-processing side. So how do you post-process it? If you don't normally shoot people, how about shooting people? How about taking just playing around with portraits of people that you know. They can be fun, they can be candid shots. You can have them pose more. You can look at what backgrounds do you have around that you can use. What sort of environments do you want to shoot them in? Do you want to shoot them in an environment that reflects them and their personality, or do you want to shoot them maybe somewhere where you wouldn't normally expect to shoot people? So I love shooting in more kind of industrial type environments, ideally an environment that's been abandoned a little while ago, because then if you start looking at photographing in black and white, you can get some really good tones. And black and white is about the textures of what you're shooting and the shapes. So it gives you a different way of looking at that environment, even that person. How do you play with the cropping? Do you go very tight on their eyes? Do you do a very broad crop so they're a very small piece of that environment? There are lots of possibilities, lots of things to play with. And then, of course, you can, as I say, you can apply that back, if you wish, to what you would normally photograph. So they're just a few very simple examples of what you could choose to photograph. Now, I've spoken about themes as well. And so I've spoken about macro themes, shooting your subject in their environment. Micro themes, so shooting details or very small animals, but things that often people won't even look at, people will overlook. And another thing you can do is perhaps use time. So that might be shooting at different times of day, picking the same subject, the same angle, maybe setting up a tripod if it's possible to leave a tripod in position, and just shooting the same subject at different times of day. So you're beginning to record the change in light, the maybe if it's plants and flowers, how they open and how they close. It might be, as I say, how the lighting illuminates certain things. If you're doing, say, a building or a wall, something with texture, how does the change in lighting affect the feel of that subject and the feel of that object as you look at it in the image? So that's a very simple thing you can do, and you can do it over the course of a few days. You might find that you have slightly different lighting conditions. It might be bright sunshine one day, it might be cloudy the next, it might be raining the next. So what's the difference? How does the change in environment and the change in time change the look of your subject? And again, this can give you insights into how you can use lighting more creatively, how you can use time of day more creatively. Is there a time of day that gives you a particular outcome that you really like? So all of these kind of questions. Now, with the time shot, that then opens you up to longer term projects. So you might have tried shooting something maybe over the course of a month, shooting the same subject at exactly the same time of day every day for a month. You can do the same day of the month at the same time over a year or many years if you want to do a long-term one. So once you start looking at photography from that perspective, again, it opens up a lot more possibilities of things you can do and things you can shoot. And initially it might be more of a habit, so thinking about what you're shooting, but once you start to get some results and you start to get together a sequence of photographs, you can turn that into a project which could become a movie, it could become an album, it could become framed shots where you're doing maybe 4 or 6 or 8 or 12 images in the same frame. So there again, another way to look at this is, what do you do with the images once you've recorded them? Having digital images gives you a lot of options, and there are a lot of options now about how you use them. You might want to put them on a wall, either as single images or multiples. You could put them in a book, and as I say, you could create video, so you can do all sorts of things with them. So those are some ideas about the kind of thing you can do locally. But again, just to come back to the beginning of it, the whole point of this is really to help you to stay engaged photographically so that you don't lose your skills. If you're one of those people who tends to leave the camera put away, and I used to do this with whale watching photography when I was in Sydney. If I wasn't really traveling anywhere and I was working full time, I would tend to not use the camera very often. So I got myself involved with a local group and started doing urban photography, which wasn't something that I really would do normally. It wasn't something that interested me too much, but it gave me different insights. It got me thinking about how I could use the camera in different ways. So hence the idea behind this podcast, to give you something that hopefully will inspire you to try something new and perhaps develop your own photography. So that's it for this podcast. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you found it interesting. I hope it's given you some ideas. And I will be producing another podcast and be with you next time. So have a great day, whatever you're doing, and enjoy your photography. Bye for now. Oh, and one thing just before you go, please take a look at the 2026 wildlife calendar. That's available now. It's on the website. There's a link below the description of this podcast episode. So please take a look, and I'll speak to you next time. Bye now.